Hello, I'm Amanda Walker and welcome to Inside America, the show that brings you insight and analysis of the biggest issues facing the United States right now.
We lost the line! We lost the line! We need to hold the doors of the Capitol!
In this episode, President Trump's January 6th pardons, the defining act of day one of his presidency. What does this sweeping clemency mean for America's rule of law?
It's time to evacuate so we can secure the members on the other side. Copy.
It was a campaign promise kept with gusto, ending what he called a grave national injustice.
These people have already served years in prison, and they've served them viciously. It's a disgusting prison. It's been horrible. It's inhumane. It's been a terrible, terrible thing.
But it's a move so controversial that even some Trump loyalists have distanced themselves from it.
I do not agree with the commutation of any sentence of any individual who committed violence against law enforcement.
Coming up, the first rioter to face trial tells us how it feels to be pardoned.
I was just grateful. I was so grateful knowing that I was about to put my arms around my wife and my daughters again and my family. Thank you very much, Donald J. Trump.
And we hear why one repentant rioter rejected her pardon.
I pleaded guilty because I was guilty. I want to complete my sentence. I don't want to be a part of them trying to rewrite history.
So, January 6, 2021, the day a mob of Donald Trump's supporters stormed the US Capitol during the certification of Joe Biden's election victory, bringing violence to what should have been a peaceful transfer of power. Over 140 police officers were injured. Some were attacked with metal pipes and baseball bats. More than 1,500 people were charged, over 600 with violent crimes. Prosecutors said other weapons that were used or carried included guns, knives, tasers, and axes. Since then, it's been rewritten as a day of love. Trump's campaign rallies often featured the national anthem sung by prisoners in a Washington, D.C. jail. Those prisoners and many more are now free. I went to meet one of them.
The man in blue is Guy Reffitt, seen here advancing on the US Capitol. Prosecutors said he lit the match of the January 6th riot and that he was armed and carrying zip ties.
So what was your intention that day? What did you want to do?
I just want to protest. That's why I had a megaphone, so I could yell from way out there. I had no idea we were going to get that close.
Prosecutors said that his objective was to overtake Congress physically and with violence. In court, they played this video with what they say is Reffitt's voice.
I didn't come here to play games. I'm taking the Capitol. I just want to see Pelosi's head hit every there on the way out.
Were you violent that day?
If you've seen the video, you know that I was not. The accusation is something that's just, it's hyperbole from the government and from the judge. It's all
a narrative.
It's clearly not true.
Reffitt eventually retreated after being pepper sprayed in the face. By this point, the Capitol floodgates had opened. He was eventually found guilty on all counts and sentenced to over 7 years in jail. Donald Trump came to the rescue.
What happened when you heard about the pardon?
Until it happened, you just didn't know. You know, you just had, just sheer faith and optimism.
After 4 years of ups and downs, you just keep it in the back of your head that, it could not always happen. You just don't know. And then you wait till it happens. And then whenever it happens, you just kind of have to pull that in and find out where you feel at that moment. I was just grateful. I was so grateful. And when I talked to her, I wanted to cry, but you're in prison with a bunch of very, very tough guys. You don't want to come off crying, but it was heart swelling. It was definitely my chest felt like that. My heart was going to explode knowing that I was about to put my arms around my wife and my daughters again and my family and see them again.
I know this is not easy for you.
Not all of Guy's family members were celebrating. His son Jackson, who turned him into the FBI, has told US networks that he now fears for his life.
I have nothing else to do other than just to sit here and be paranoid. And imagine what could happen.
So your son Jackson has been saying that he's terrified of you, so much so that he's bought a gun and moved. How do you feel about that?
As a father, it's very disconcerting. It hurts me. It hurts my heart. I'm sorry that he feels that way. I've even told him that. I've told him, I love you, Jackson. I am sorry you feel that way. If the only violence in my life that you would ever see from me is that if I could rip that feeling out of your heart somehow to make you feel less like that.
Are you a danger to the community?
No, by no means, and I'm no danger to my son either.
So if you could relive January 6th, what would you do differently?
I would not have been away from my family, but would I have done something differently on January 6th? There's a few things. I wouldn't have said some of the stuff I said.
Would you take a gun with you?
Yeah, that's not significantly been a situation as far as that goes. I'm not concerned about whether there was a gun there or not.
Why did you have a gun with you?
Well, first you have to show me a gun.
So you didn't?
That's not something we're going to get into.
Despite his crimes, Refit is now a free man who sees his pardon as real vindication.
Thank you very much, Donald J. Trump. We appreciate you. And, it was an honor to be a part of this part of history in this country. It was a political persecution. Yes, we were political hostages. People don't like to hear that to some degree, but you're not on that side. You're on that side. I'm on this side. I was a political prisoner.
Well, not all of the so-called J6ers agree with Guy Reffitt's feeling of victimhood. Pamela Hemphill was an ardent Trump supporter who was also at the US Capitol that day. She's been facing the wrath of the J6 community because of her decision to reject Donald Trump's pardon. I asked her why she made that decision.
Well, first, for me, it would be a slap in the face to Capitol police officers that were injured that day against the rule of law and our nation. I pleaded guilty because I was guilty. I want to complete my sentence. I don't want to be a part of them trying to rewrite history. That was a peaceful protest that day. It was not. Everyone there broke the law, and the DOJ is not weaponized against any of the J6 defendants, criminals, at all.
So, do you think anyone should be pardoned?
No, everyone broke the law. They have evidence. They're not weaponized against the J6 defendants. That's their propaganda. But see, Trump had to get that. He had to pardon them all because his message has been the DOJ is weaponized against him. Well, if he pardoned any of the J6ers, then he's saying that the DOJ is not weaponized against everyone. But no, he has to make sure that the message is that the DOJ and the deep state is weaponized against everyone. And that's why he's got to get rid of the FBI and clean out the deep state that they call it, which is crazy.
Why did you think it was the right thing to be there?
Well, I still was on the edge because they gaslight you so much if the election had been stolen or not. But by the time January 6th came around, I thought people can't be lying. Trump's not lying. There's got to be evidence somewhere. It's going to show up, right, that the election was stolen. See, the Republicans and Trump was convincing people at the time that the Democrats want to turn it into a communist nation. And it scares you. He says, they're coming after me, but they're really coming after you. So that scared me. He's like, okay. And you're not schooled, and you're not paying attention to what's really going on. You lose your critical thinking. So you're just listening to everybody around you, and you fall for the big line. I was mega, and I had it's our house, that whole mega going along with all the narrative that was going on at that time.
And what changed your view on that? What is your view now?
Well, there was 2 incidents. I went to see my therapist like 6 months later. I was feeling like my victim, when I kept talking about January 6th, like I was a victim. So I went to see my therapist, and he said, Miss Hemphill, you're not a victim. You were a volunteer. And I thought, I'm never going to talk to him again. But I went home that night, and I did some writing, some praying. And I said, come on, Pam, you're not a victim. You could have left. And I had to drop that victim attitude.
What kind of conversations have you had with other rioters when you've tried to give them the perspective that the election wasn't stolen and that what they did on January 6th was a crime?
You can't talk to them. They yell at you. Who you been listening to, Pam? Totally, always gaslighting. That's not the truth. Who are you listening to? You've lost your mind. I don't want to talk to you. They don't want to have a back and forth, conversation like a debate. They don't want to debate because anything I could present to them, evidence, they deny it. So it's deep denial.
So you were part of that MAGA movement. What's been the general response to you speaking out?
Oh, death threats, SWAT threats, smear campaigns. They're calling all the journalists right now everywhere, saying, don't put Pam on the platform. We got a file on you. They've called out to Pam Bondi to arrest me. I don't care. I don't care. I don't like bullies, and I'll keep speaking out when you're talking some facts and the truth. I don't care. They're vicious when you leave the mega call. They get vicious.
What message do you think that Trump issuing these pardons sends?
Oh, that the DOJ is weaponized against him and anybody that follows him, which is not true, but that's been his campaign to try to convince you that there's a deep state and they're trying to destroy this country. He is now their savior, their God, and he knows what he's doing and he's going to save America. But it's not true. So if he lets out the J6 criminals, he has his own militia now. So he can send them out when there's peaceful protests going on. He's a dangerous narcissist. And it's sending a horrifying, very frightening message that you can break the law, you can hit officers, and it's okay, and go back out there and do it again. It's horrifying.
Does it jeopardize the rule of law in America?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's the worst example you can imagine. I mean, I'm still trying to wrap my head around this. Some of these had criminal records before January 6th. I mean, domestic violence, beating up women, you name it. They're very frightening, and it's a white supremacist, and they're racist. Most of them have alcohol and drug problems. That was in court records. It was a big percentage. They have a lot of issues that they've never dealt with. They're violent. They're angry. Oh, Trump just opened the door for...
With all that in mind, Pam, do you fear for your own safety?
Yes, I got to be cautious, not paranoid, but I'm not going to let nobody scare me. What are they going to do? Lock me in prison, maybe, or kill me, or I don't know, but you can't
Sounds
worry
pretty
about
scary.
that. You have to speak out. You can't let what they're saying to you stop you from talking. You've got to share facts. And I believe as long as you're doing the right thing, it's going to work out. You got to have faith.
January 6th rioter Pamela Hemphill there. So let's get into the details of exactly how the rule of law has been impacted by Donald Trump's decision. Let's welcome back Elise Adamson. She's a former federal prosecutor who was at the Capitol on January 6th, and she arraigned the first insurrectionists. I'm also joined by Praveen Hernandez, Vice President at the Constitutional Accountability Center. Welcome to you both. First of all, Elise, let me start with you. So clearly this was a massive priority for Donald Trump. Why?
Well, Donald Trump cares a lot about loyalty, and these rioters exemplified the most loyal of Trump supporters. On top of that, Donald Trump has felt aggrieved for a very long time. He felt like there was a weaponization of the Department of Justice and he was being unfairly targeted. This was all political to him. And so day one in the office, he just made it all go away with all of the pardons.
And Praveen, what message was this supposed to send and what message has it actually sent?
It's the pardon power is so broad, and the Constitution at Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1 vests this power in the president. There are actually very few fetters on that. There's an Office of the Pardon Attorney at the Department of Justice, but really, ultimately, this vests in the president.
So he can pardon who he wants.
And he can pardon who he
Clearly.
wants. And what a president does when they exercise that clemency power says a lot about a president and their administration. So you're asking the right question. What message does it send out when on day one of the Trump presidency, 1,500 individuals plus 14 commutations to individuals who were involved in a historic attack on the United States Capitol, an attack that was in service of overturning the results of the 2020 election. It's a terrible message for democracy.
I'm interested in that notion of rewriting history because putting together this show, you know, we've all been reminded of exactly what happened that day. And it doesn't need interpretation because the footage is there. But there has been this very obvious attempt to rewrite this as a day of love, as Donald Trump himself has said. What's behind that?
That's right, Amanda. And I think that's very, very dangerous. I was at the Capitol on January 6th, and I saw with my own eyes that this was a violent, riotous mob that broke into the Capitol to disturb the peaceful transfer of power. It's that simple. It was a crime of a large scale that was captured on national television. And I think we have to continue to remind people of this and tell them, to your point, just watch the footage. This is not a media soundbite. This is simply a fact. And Donald Trump has been trying to rewrite this as a day of peace and love, just his supporters supporting him. It wasn't. It was a disturbance of our democratic process through force and violence. And when we normalize that behavior, our democracy itself is at risk because it is tacit agreement that that is okay, and it simply is not.
Praveen, do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And I would only say that, you know, even for individuals who were not there, there have been so many inquiries into the facts of what happened on January 6th. So this rewriting is not only in contradiction of, you know, individuals who were there that day, but the work of the January 6th bipartisan select committee that conducted its work over almost 2 years, over 140,000 documents, over 1,000 depositions and sworn testimony. The individuals who swore testimony that, as with all congressional testimony, is subject to perjury charges if it's found false. So the facts of what happened on January 6th have actually been established over and over and over again by rigorous bodies.
We've spoken to rioters in the show who say that they were political prisoners, that they were hostages during the time they were in jail. It is a completely different perspective. As with so much of the Trump era, you have two alternate realities. They are so strong in their belief that this was doing the right thing. Will they do it again?
I fear that they will, Amanda. In my experience as a former prosecutor, if we don't hold people to account, they're likely to reoffend. Recidivism is high, and that's because they don't believe there's consequences for their actions. And here, it's even more dangerous because they've essentially been told by the President of the United States that what they did was acceptable and good. To me, that was the message that these pardons sent. And mind you, originally, the public were told that they may be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. So those individuals that engaged in violence against police officers, for instance, would not receive a pardon, but that didn't happen. The president gave a blanket pardon to all individuals. So even the most violent individuals have been handed a get-out-of-jail-free card and back on the street. And we've already seen some of these individuals reoffend in the mere weeks since the pardon. And so I think that the likely outcome of this pardon is going to be, unfortunately, more of the same. I think the question is of what scale.
And there was, I think, some urging from within his own allies saying, don't go so blanket on this. Let's look at it case by case. But what do we take from the fact that this was so sweeping?
I mean, absolutely. In the run-up to the inauguration, Vice President J.D. Vance specifically said that it would be inappropriate for violent offenders to receive that sort of pardon. And when the actual order happened on day one, that distinction between violent and non-violent offenders, that distinction was nowhere to be found in that final individual. In her confirmation hearing, Pam Bondi, who has recently been confirmed as Attorney General, in her confirmation hearing, she was asked about violence against law enforcement officials, and she condemned it. And so, the notion is the president has this power, but the president has exercised this clemency power in a way that has made even members of his cabinet prior to this exercise profoundly uncomfortable, because it's dissonant with the language of a law and order president.
Right, and Elise, these aren't just violent individuals. These are extremist groups who now feel very emboldened. What kind of things have they been saying since the pardons, and what can we expect in terms of how they may operate going forward?
Well, to be clear, not all of the defendants were part of extremist groups. We did have some individual actors who participated in the events of Jan 6. You're referring to groups such as the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio, for instance, who claimed to have some kind of change of heart during his sentencing, but is now back to the media, walking it back, being proud of his behavior. And yes, I mean, these organizations are extremely dangerous. We heard through trial testimony what they had been planning, and it was a seditious conspiracy. A jury found them guilty of seditious conspiracy. And once again, now they've been emboldened. They think that what they did was correct. And who knows? I mean, the Proud Boys think that they're backing up the president. They're their own militias. We don't need that. We have a military. But they believe that they have the authority now to continue. And so I think we're going to see these extremist groups continue on with their philosophy and perhaps become even more extreme because the president has commended them for their behavior.
Yeah, Praveen, what do you make of that? Just in isolation, that you have these troubling extremist groups who would be on the radar of law enforcement having the backing of the President of the United States. Where does that leave us in terms of the rule of law?
Well, it's incredibly troubling. It's also troubling because it's happening in concert with the rooting out at our law enforcement agencies of individuals who are seen to have been disloyal to Trump. So I'm thinking of the FBI employee questionnaires, trying to suss out who had any involvement with the January 6th investigations. These are career prosecutors and law enforcement officials who were just doing their jobs. These are individuals who remembered that they swore an oath as federal employees, not to a particular president, not to a particular administration, but rather to the Constitution. And so I'm worried that at the very moment that these dangerous individuals are back on to the streets, potentially doing new acts of political violence, but the apparatus that is in place to police and to protect the American public is being systematically dismantled.
What do you make of that, Elise? The idea of career prosecutors who are now potentially being forced out for just having worked on the processes after January 6th. I mean, again, it comes down to this idea of loyalty, doesn't it?
That's right. But as Praveen just said, a career prosecutor is not loyal to the president in office. They're loyal to the Constitution. And we're just doing their jobs. And just so viewers know, prosecutors are assigned to cases, as are FBI agents. They don't have a say in what they work on. So now the notion that they're going to be let go for just doing their job is absolutely outrageous. What else would you have them do? If you really follow that logic to conclusion, you would have civil servants anytime they believe that something would make the executive upset, that they should refuse to do their job. How would the government function? But to your point, that's how Donald Trump wants it. He wants extreme loyalty. And unfortunately, he might just get it, because if they truly were to dismiss 5,000 FBI agents. I think it is unlikely, but that's how many answered the questionnaire. That would greatly reduce the ranks of the FBI, I think by something like 13%. Don't quote me on that. That's just based on the numbers of the FBI. And so what are they going to do? We're either less safe because there are fewer federal agents working to secure America, or they're going to be replaced with Trump loyalists who, in Trump's mind, need to be loyal to him and not to the Constitution. I think either scenario is very concerning.
And just finally from you, Praveen, where does this notion of ultimate loyalty take America? Loyalty to Trump, not to the Constitution.
I think it's so corrosive to attach loyalty to an individual, to a political party, and that's why our oaths for all federal officials, not just the high officials, rank and file government employees take this oath, because their notion is the work is on behalf of the American people in service of the Constitution.
Okay, Praveen, Elise, thank you both so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Now, flooding the zone is usually a sports strategy, but it's being used to describe Trump's approach to his second presidency. It won't have escaped you that there is so much major change happening at breakneck speed. We'll do our best to keep on top of it. So thanks for watching and join us next time.